The scent of stale coffee and hot grease was the perfume of Naomi's life. It clung to her uniform, her hair, the skin of her hands. She moved through the narrow aisles of the midnight diner with an economy of motion born from years of practice, balancing 3 plates on one arm, a coffee pot in the other hand. The clatter of cutlery and the low hum of conversation were her soundtrack.
She was good at this. Competent.
She could read a table in a single glance, who was in a hurry, who was going to be a difficult tipper, who just needed to sit with their loneliness for a while. Tonight, the usual rhythm was broken. It happened just after 1 in the morning. The bell over the door chimed, a sound usually associated with tired truckers or college students, but the cold that swept in was different. It silenced the room. 4 men walked in. 3 were large, built like brick walls in ill-fitting suits. They scanned the diner with dead eyes. The 4th man, the one they moved around like an invisible barrier, was the source of the sudden chill. He was not large, but he occupied more space than anyone in the room. His suit was a dark charcoal, tailored so precisely it looked less like fabric and more like a second skin, carved from shadow. Ink, intricate and blue-black, curled just above the collar of his crisp white shirt and peeked from the cuffs of his sleeves. He moved with a liquid grace that was utterly at odds with the sticky, linoleum floor. He was Japanese, his features sharp and aristocratic, his black hair cut with surgical precision. His eyes, dark and unreadable, swept over the room once, dismissing everything in it. They settled on the last empty booth. Her section. Naomi felt a prickle of professional annoyance mixed with something else, something colder. She grabbed a menu, her movements deliberate and calm. She approached the booth as the 4 men settled in, their silence a heavy blanket on the diner's usual noise. She placed the menus on the table. "Welcome to the Night Owl," she said, her voice even. "Can I start you with some coffee?" The man in the center, clearly the boss, did not look at her. He spoke to one of his men in low, rapid Japanese. The subordinate answered, then turned to Naomi. 4 black coffees." Naomi nodded and turned away, feeling the boss's eyes on her back. It was not a look of interest. It was a look of assessment, like a butcher examining a side of beef. She was a big woman, tall and broad-shouldered with generous curves she had long ago made her peace with. She had seen that look before, but never with such cold, impersonal weight. She returned with the coffees, setting them down with steady hands. The boss picked up his menu, his long, elegant fingers tracing the laminated plastic as if it were a precious scroll. He ordered for the table without looking up, his voice a low baritone, speaking in perfect, unaccented English. A steak for him rare. Various breakfast plates for his men. As Naomi finished writing down the order, one of his men muttered something in Japanese, gesturing with his chin toward the sizzling grill. It sounded like a complaint about the quality of the establishment. The boss replied, his voice soft, almost a whisper, still in his native tongue. His eyes flicked to Naomi for a fraction of a second, a dismissal so complete it was more insulting than any slur. The words he spoke were quiet, meant only for his men, a casual observation from a man used to absolute control and refinement, momentarily trapped in a world he considered beneath him. He spoke about the lack of discipline, the softness, letting things go to waste. It was a comment on the diner, on the country, but the timing, the flick of his eyes toward her, made the final part of his statement personal. He had used her as a physical example of his point. A hot, familiar shame tried to rise in her throat, but she swallowed it down. Years of dealing with rude customers had forged a thick armor around her heart. But this was different. The insult wasn't just about her size. It was about her character, delivered with the casual cruelty of a king kicking a stone from his path. And it was delivered in a language he assumed was a shield, a secret code she could never understand. He was wrong. Naomi had a bachelor's degree in East Asian studies, a past life before her mother got sick and dreams had to be replaced by double shifts. Her Japanese was not just fluent. It was formal, precise, the result of 4 years of intense study and a semester abroad in Kyoto. She did not raise her voice. She did not let a single tremor of anger show on her face. She simply paused, her pen hovering over her notepad. She looked directly at the boss, meeting his cold, surprised gaze. And in the same formal, polite Japanese he had used, she spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like glass. Discipline has many forms. The effect was instantaneous. The man to his right, who had been lifting his coffee cup, froze midair. The other two stared at her, their mouths slightly agape. For a full second, the only sound was the sizzle of bacon on the grill. The boss himself did not move a muscle, but something shifted in his eyes. The mask of indifference cracked, revealing a flicker of pure, unadulterated shock. It was as if a piece of furniture had suddenly spoken to him, and not just spoken, but challenged his entire worldview in his own language. The silence in the booth stretched, becoming a tangible thing, a vacuum that pulled all the air from the diner. That was the moment everything changed. Before anyone could speak, the diner's front windows exploded inward in a shower of glass and splintered wood. The sound was a deafening roar, followed by the sharp crack of gunfire. Screams erupted. Patrons dove under tables. Naomi's training, the muscle memory of her job, screamed at her to drop. But she was frozen, staring at the man whose world had just violently crashed into hers. He moved like a viper striking. In one fluid motion, he was out of the booth, his hand grabbing the front of her uniform. He didn't throw her or shove her. He pulled her with him, using his body as a shield, forcing them both down behind the relative safety of the Formica counter. His men were already returning fire, their movements coordinated and lethal. The air filled with the smell of gunpowder and ozone, sharp and acrid, completely overwhelming the familiar scent of coffee. Pressed against the cold tile floor, with the weight of this dangerous stranger pinning her down, Naomi could feel the hard lines of a gun holstered beneath his jacket. His scent filled her senses, expensive cologne with a note of cedar and something else, something like cold steel. He was whispering commands in Japanese, his voice no longer a soft baritone but a blade of ice. The firefight was over almost as quickly as it began. A final volley of shots, the squeal of tires outside, and then a ringing silence, punctuated by the whimpers of terrified customers and the frantic ticking of the wall clock. One of the boss's men gave a sharp report in Japanese. All clear. The man above her did not move immediately. He shifted his weight, his breath warm against her ear as he listened to the report. Then, he pushed himself up, releasing her. He stood and surveyed the damage, his face a mask of cold fury. The diner was destroyed. Bullet holes stitched across the vinyl seats and the walls. Her world was in ruins. He turned his gaze back to her, still on the floor. His eyes were different now. The dismissive assessment was gone. In its place was something sharp, calculating, and possessive. "You cannot leave," he said in English, his voice flat and absolute. You saw their faces. He wasn't asking. He was informing her of a fact. She was no longer just a waitress who had surprised him. She was a witness, a liability. And in his world, liabilities were either controlled or eliminated. He reached down a hand to help her up. His grip was like iron, his palm calloused. As she stood on shaky legs, Naomi knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that her life as a waitress at the Night Owl Diner was over. She had walked into his world, and he was not going to let her walk back out. His name was Kaito Tanaka. She learned this not because he introduced himself, but because she heard one of his men say it as they bundled her into the back of a black sedan that materialized out of the night. The car was silent, gliding through the city streets like a ghost. No one spoke to her. Kaito sat beside her, his presence a palpable force. He stared out the window, his jaw tight, his reflection a cold silhouette against the passing city lights. They took her to a penthouse apartment that seemed to float among the clouds. It was a world of glass and chrome and stark white furniture, a sterile cage that smelled of nothing at all. It was the complete opposite of the warm, cluttered chaos of her own small apartment, of the diner, of her life. "You will stay here," Kaito said, his voice echoing in the vast, empty living room. "My men will be outside the door. Do not try to leave." For 2 days, she was a ghost in his gilded prison. She ate food that was left for her on a tray, slept in a bed larger than her entire bedroom, and stared out at a city that no longer felt like hers. She was terrified, but a stubborn core of defiance kept her from breaking down. She had survived double shifts, medical bills, and grief. She would survive this. On the third day, he came to see her. He found her in the living room, sketching on a napkin she'd found in a drawer, a habit from long, slow nights at the diner. He didn't speak at first, just watched her from the doorway. He had shed the perfect suit for a simple black shirt and dark pants. Without the armor of his tailoring, he looked younger, but no less dangerous. The intricate tattoos were more visible, covering his arms in a tapestry of dragons and waves. "My people are analyzing the security footage from the diner," he said, finally breaking the silence. "The images are poor quality. The attackers wore masks." Naomi kept her eyes on her drawing. "I know. I saw them." "Tell me what you saw." She looked up at him, then really looked at him. His face was impassive, but she could see the tension in the set of his shoulders, the faint lines of fatigue around his eyes. He wasn't just a monster. He was a man at war. "One of them had a limp," she said quietly. "His left leg. And a tattoo on his right wrist, just below the glove. A green clover." Kaito's eyes narrowed. "A clover?" "The O'Malley crew," she said. It was just street gossip, things she overheard from cops who came into the diner late at night. "The Irish. I hear they're trying to push into new territory." He stared at her for a long moment, a new kind of assessment in his gaze. It wasn't about her body anymore. It was about her mind. She had just given him more in 30 seconds than his own intelligence had gathered in 2 days. She had chosen to help, not out of loyalty, but out of a fierce, pragmatic need to survive. If he won his war, maybe she could go home. "You are observant," he said. It was not a compliment. It was a statement of fact. "You have to be in my job," she replied, her voice steady. "You learn to see what people aren't showing you." That night, he had a tactical meeting in the living room. She was meant to stay in the bedroom, but she stood by the door listening. They spoke in Japanese, their voices low and urgent. They had a name, a location, a plan to strike back at the O'Malleys based on her information. As Kaito gave the final orders, his voice was calm, precise, and utterly lethal. She heard him say her name, Naomi, and the way he said it was different. It wasn't the name of a waitress. It was the name of an asset, a piece on his chessboard. He found her by the door when the meeting was over. His men had filed out, leaving them alone in the cavernous room. The city lights glittered below them like a carpet of fallen stars. "You should not have been listening," he said, his voice soft. "You shouldn't have insulted me in a language you assumed I couldn't understand," she countered, her bravery surprising even herself. A flicker of something, not anger, maybe respect, crossed his face. He stepped closer, invading her space. She had to tilt her head back to look up at him. He smelled of cedar and smoke again, a scent that was becoming dangerously familiar. "I failed to protect someone once," he said, the admission so quiet she barely heard it. "A colleague. He was family. A betrayal from within my organization led our enemies to him. I was not disciplined enough. I did not see the signs. I will not make that mistake again." It wasn't an apology. It was an explanation. It was the key to understanding the cold, controlled man in front of her. His cruelty came from a place of deep, old pain. He saw a lack of discipline as a fatal flaw because it had cost him someone he was sworn to protect. He had looked at her and seen a vulnerability, and it had offended his rigid, scarred sense of order. And now he was looking at her and seeing something else entirely. His gaze dropped to her lips for a fraction of a second before meeting her eyes again. The silence between them was not empty. It was charged with the tension of everything that had happened, the insult, the gunfire, the forced proximity, this unwilling confession. He was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his body. She told herself it was survival instinct that made her heart hammer against her ribs. She was lying. The raid on the O'Malley safe house, guided by Naomi's intelligence, was a success, but a costly one. Kaido returned just before dawn, a dark look on his face. They had crippled the rival crew, but not without losses. He moved with a stiff, controlled gait that told her he was hiding an injury. The memory of the wound-tending rule in the prompt was a phantom instruction in her mind. She knew not to offer help, not to fuss. She just watched him, her silence a question he refused to answer. He went to the bar and poured himself a whiskey, his back to her. "They know about you," he said, his voice rough. "They don't know who you are, but they know I took a civilian witness from the diner. They are looking for you." The floor seemed to drop out from under her. "What does that mean?" "It means you are no longer just a witness," he said, turning to face her. His dark eyes were intense. "You are a target. A way to get to me." A cold dread washed over her. Her old life wasn't just on hold. It was obliterated. The O'Malleys wouldn't care that she was an innocent bystander. To them, she was a pawn, a piece of property belonging to Kaido Tanaka. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the penthouse grew heavier. The war outside was escalating. Kaido was a whirlwind of violent, calculated motion, coming and going at all hours. But something had shifted between them. He would find reasons to be in the same room with her, watching her sketch, asking her questions about her studies, about the books she read. He was studying her, trying to understand how she could remain so calm in the heart of a storm. One evening, his men brought in a captured O'Malley soldier. They took him to a back room, and the interrogation began. Naomi tried to block out the sounds, but the man's defiant shouts, followed by the sickening thud of fists, were impossible to ignore. After an hour, one of Kaido's lieutenants emerged, his face grim. "He won't talk." Kaido stood, his expression turning to ice. "Then I will make him." Naomi watched him walk toward the room, and an impulse she couldn't explain seized her. "Wait." He stopped, turning to look at her. "Let me try," she said. His lieutenant scoffed, but Kaido was silent, his eyes searching hers.
"Why?"
"Because you're trying to break him with pain," she said, her voice shaking slightly but firm. "But he's a soldier. He's expecting pain. You're just proving to him that you're the monster he thinks you are. You're not giving him a reason to betray his own." It was a reckless, insane thing to do. She was a waitress. He was a Yakuza boss. But she had spent her life watching people, understanding their hidden hungers and fears. She walked past Kaido and into the room. The soldier was tied to a chair, his face bruised and bloody. He glared at her with pure hatred. She didn't look at his injuries. She looked at his hands, at the cheap, worn silver band on his ring finger. She asked one of Kaido's men for a bottle of water and a glass. She poured it and set it on a small table just out of the man's reach. "She must be waiting for you," Naomi said softly. The man's eyes flickered. "The woman who gave you that ring. She's probably wondering where you are. If you're okay." The soldier spat on the floor. "You know nothing." "I know what it's like to wait for someone who might not come home," she said, her voice laced with a genuine sadness he wasn't expecting. "I know that the people who send men like you out to die in their wars don't care about the women who wait. Your boss, O'Malley? He's already replaced you. But she can't." She let the silence sit. She didn't threaten him. She didn't bargain. She just offered him a picture of a truth he already knew, a truth that pain and fear had obscured. She had crossed a line. This wasn't just observation anymore. This was participation. This was a morally gray act she could never take back. An hour later, she walked out of the room, leaving the broken man talking, spilling every secret the O'Malleys had. Kaido was waiting for her in the living room, his expression unreadable. "You see things others do not," he said. It was the same thing he'd said before, but now it held a different weight. It held awe. "I learned to see what people need," she replied, her heart pounding. "Not just what they say." He stepped toward her, his presence consuming the air. "That is a dangerous skill in my world," he said, his voice a low growl. "Especially for me." It was a confession, not of love, but of vulnerability. An admission that she saw past the armor he had spent a lifetime building. He saw her, and she, in turn, saw him. The information from the captured soldier revealed the O'Malley's final, desperate plan, an ambush at a supposed peace talk. They were using the threat against Naomi as bait, leaking information that he was moving her, hoping to draw him into a trap. But now, Kaito knew the trap's design.
He could turn it on them.
The night of the meeting, the penthouse was a fortress of silent, armed men. The plan was for Naomi to remain there, protected. But as she watched Kaito prepare to leave, a cold knot of fear tightened in her stomach. She looked at the tactical maps spread across his table, and her knowledge of the city, the ordinary, everyday city, screamed at her. They had planned for every entrance, every street. But they had missed one thing. A service alley, one that ran behind the bakery, where she used to buy day-old bread. It wasn't on any official city map. It was a local shortcut, an escape route. She knew, with absolute certainty, that was how the O'Malley boss planned to slip away. Kaito was about to walk out the door when she grabbed his arm. "You missed something." He looked from her hand on his sleeve to her face. She quickly explained, her words tumbling out, pointing to the spot on the map. He listened, his expression intent. He saw it immediately. The flaw in his perfect plan, discovered by the woman he dismissed in a greasy spoon diner. He gave a sharp series of orders to his lieutenant, changing the deployment of his men to cover the alley. Before he left, he turned back to her. He reached out and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers brushing against her skin. The touch was electric, a silent promise. "Stay here." The hours that followed were the longest of her life. Finally, a car pulled up to the building. It was Kaito. He was alive. He walked into the penthouse, the scent of cordite and the cold night air clinging to him. The war was over. The O'Malleys were broken. He came to a stop in front of her. The calculated control in his eyes was gone, replaced by something raw and absolute. "They came for you because of me," he said, his voice rough with the aftermath of battle. "That will not happen again. You are under my protection." He paused, his gaze locking with hers, a silent, binding oath passing between them. "That is not a request. It was not a declaration of love. It was a statement of fact. A claim. Her old life, the diner, her small apartment, her anonymity, it was all ash. The cost of her survival was the life she once knew. The cost for him was the one thing he never allowed himself, a vulnerability. A person whose safety was now inextricably linked to his own. Later, as the city slept below, they stood by the vast window, looking out at the endless sea of lights. The skyline was the same, but her place within it had been irrevocably altered. He stood just behind her, not touching, but his presence was a shield, a promise of a dangerous and uncertain future. He set a cup of steaming green tea on the table beside her, the scent clean and calming. It was a simple, quiet gesture in a world built on violence. She did not look at him. She simply reached out and picked up the cup. It was warm in her hands, a small point of heat in the cold, glittering night. She had made her choice, not with words, but with this simple act of acceptance. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of everything to come.